In the early 1960s, the world was a chessboard of geopolitical tension, dominated by the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War was at its zenith, a period of intense ideological conflict, espionage, and a constant, looming threat of nuclear annihilation. Just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, the island of Cuba had become a focal point of this global struggle. Fidel Castro's successful revolution in 1959 had installed a communist government, creating a Soviet-aligned state in America's backyard. This development was viewed by many in the U.S. government as an intolerable provocation and a direct threat to national security. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 had been a significant embarrassment for the Kennedy administration, only deepening the resolve of some to remove Castro. Within the highest echelons of the U.S. military, a dangerous and radical idea began to take shape. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, the most senior uniformed leaders of the United States Armed Forces, were tasked with conceiving options for dealing with Cuba. Led by their chairman, General Lyman Lemnitzer, they sought a definitive justification for direct military intervention. What emerged from their deliberations was a document so shocking it would remain secret for nearly 4 decades. This document, titled Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba, was given the codename Operation Northwoods. It was a blueprint for a series of elaborate and deceptive false flag operations designed to provoke a war. The core premise of Operation Northwoods was to orchestrate acts of violence and attribute them convincingly to Fidel Castro's government. The document stated its purpose explicitly: to create a series of well-coordinated incidents that would provide undeniable justification for U.S. military action. The proposals contained within were nothing short of breathtaking in their cynicism and audacity. One of the plans suggested creating a communist Cuban terror campaign within the United States itself. This could involve staging bombings in the Miami area, or even in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. The plan detailed planting fake evidence to ensure the blame would fall squarely on Cuba. Another proposal involved attacks on the American naval base at Guantanamo Bay. The document suggested staging riots near the base's main gate, creating a public spectacle of aggression. It also proposed sabotaging American ships and aircraft at the base, making it look like an inside job or a direct Cuban attack. The authors of the plan believed these actions would generate a wave of righteous indignation across the United States. Perhaps the most infamous and disturbing part of Operation Northwoods concerned a plan to hijack and destroy a civilian airliner. The scheme was meticulously detailed, outlining a multi-stage deception of incredible complexity. First, a real civilian flight from the United States would be filled with a specific group of passengers. The plan suggested these passengers could be college students on their way to a vacation destination. Simultaneously, an identical-looking aircraft, a drone, or a specially prepared duplicate, would be readied at a secure military base. This duplicate aircraft would be painted with the same registration numbers and airline colors as the real plane. Once the real flight was airborne and had passed a specific point, the two planes would rendezvous in secret. The passenger-filled aircraft would descend to a minimum altitude and land at a secure location like Eglin Air Force Base. Passengers would be evacuated, and their original flight plan would be filed as completed. Meanwhile, the drone aircraft, now assuming the real flight's identity, would continue along the original flight path. Over the ocean, near Cuba, the drone would begin broadcasting a distress signal. The distress call would include fabricated details of an attack by a Cuban MiG fighter jet. Following the fake Mayday call, the drone aircraft would be destroyed by a remote signal. The plan even suggested scattering fabricated wreckage in the water to be discovered by search and rescue teams. This event, the apparent unprovoked destruction of a civilian airliner, would be presented to the world as an act of heinous Cuban aggression, The document chillingly notes that this would provide the United States with the casus belli it needed. Another equally grim proposal involved sinking a boatload of Cuban refugees. The plan stated, "We could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated." This act would be framed as a callous action by the Castro regime, further demonizing it in the eyes of the world. The document also suggested using a fake incident involving the American astronaut John Glenn. His orbital flight in February 1962 was a moment of immense national pride. The plan proposed creating evidence that Cuban electronic interference was responsible for any potential malfunction during the flight. If the mission were to end in disaster, it could be blamed on a hostile act by Cuba. These were not the ravings of a fringe group. They were formal proposals from the highest levels of the U.S. military. The document was signed and approved by all of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It was then presented to the civilian leadership for final approval. On March 13, 1962, General Lemnitzer presented the Operation Northwoods Memorandum to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. McNamara, a former Ford executive known for his analytical approach, was reportedly appalled by the proposal. The idea of the U.S. government perpetrating acts of terror against its own citizens and interests was unthinkable to him. McNamara immediately took the document to the highest authority, President John F. Kennedy. President Kennedy's reaction was one of unequivocal rejection. He told General Lemnitzer that there was no chance the United States would ever use such methods to justify a war. The president's firm stance ensured that Operation Northwoods was dead on arrival. The plan was shelved, and the documents were buried under layers of classification. General Lemnitzer's term as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was not renewed later that year. For decades, the existence of this shocking proposal remained completely unknown to the American public. It was a dark secret held by only a handful of individuals at the very top of the government. The documents were eventually declassified in the late 1990s as part of the John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act. Their public release, primarily through the work of researcher James Bamford, sent shockwaves through the historical community. The revelation confirmed the darkest suspicions about the lengths some were willing to go to during the Cold War. Operation Northwoods serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked military power. It highlights the critical importance of civilian oversight of the armed forces in a democracy. The plan demonstrates a profound disconnect between the military leadership's mindset and the nation's democratic values. It raises fundamental questions about the nature of secrecy and the potential for abuse within government. The fact that such a plan was formally proposed and signed is, for many, more disturbing than any conspiracy theory. It was not a theory. It was a documented, albeit rejected, reality. The legacy of Operation Northwoods continues to fuel debate and skepticism about official government narratives. It has become a cornerstone for researchers investigating government deception and false flag operations. The story of Operation Northwoods is a stark lesson in how easily the mechanisms of national security can be considered for perverse ends. It underscores the moral courage it took for civilian leaders like McNamara and Kennedy to reject such a dangerous path. The world would be a very different place had they approved the plan and plunged the nation into a war based on a lie. The Cold War was a time of genuine fear, but Operation Northwoods shows that sometimes the greatest threats can come from within. The document itself is a cold, bureaucratic outline for mass deception and potential murder. There is no hint of moral reservation in the text, only a focus on operational feasibility. The plan treated human lives, both American and Cuban, as disposable pawns in a larger geopolitical game. It aimed to manipulate the emotions of the American public through fear and patriotism. The rejection of Northwoods was a victory for the rule of law and democratic principles. It affirmed that the president, not the generals, holds ultimate command and sets the nation's moral compass. The incident created a deep rift between Kennedy's administration and the military's top brass. This mistrust would fester and influence their interactions during later crises, including the Cuban Missile Crisis. During the missile crisis, Kennedy would rely more on a trusted circle of civilian advisors, partly due to the memory of Northwoods. The story remains a cautionary tale, studied in military academies and political science courses to this day. It illustrates the groupthink phenomenon, where a desire for consensus in an insulated group can lead to extreme ideas. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, isolated in their strategic worldview, saw a military solution as the only viable one. They failed to consider the profound ethical and political ramifications of their proposed actions. Operation Northwoods is not just a historical curiosity. It is a vital lesson on the fragility of democratic norms. It shows how quickly a nation can be led down a dark path if its leaders are not vigilant. The declassified document is a primary source that speaks for itself, colder and more convincing than any secondary account. Its public availability ensures that this dark chapter in American history will not be forgotten. The plan's audacity was matched only by its potential for catastrophic consequences. A war with Cuba could have easily escalated into a direct, nuclear confrontation with the Soviet Union. Therefore, the rejection of Northwoods may have been one of the most important, albeit secret, decisions of the entire era. The plan was a product of a specific time, a period of existential fear and paranoia. The military leaders who drafted it likely saw themselves as patriots finding a solution to a grave threat. However, their methods betrayed the very principles they were sworn to defend. The document proposed a "remember the Maine" type of incident, referencing the Spanish-American War. This historical reference shows a clear awareness of using a naval disaster to galvanize public support for war. The planners wanted to create an unambiguous, emotionally charged event to overcome any public reluctance. The level of detail in the plan is remarkable, from fake funerals to planting specific types of evidence. It was a script for a political thriller, but one intended to be performed on the world stage with real consequences. The plot even included a plan to harass foreign shipping and U.S. aircraft to simulate Cuban hostility. This suggested creating a fake Cuban Air Force to conduct these provocative actions. The goal was to build a cumulative case against Castro, making a military response seem inevitable and justified. The rejection of this plan by Kennedy and McNamara was a critical moment where civilian authority held firm. It demonstrated that even in the face of perceived existential threats, there were moral lines that could not be crossed. The secrecy surrounding the plan for so long is a testament to the government's ability to conceal its own controversial history. When the truth finally emerged, it forced a re-evaluation of a critical period in American history. It showed that the deep state is not always a fantasy, but can manifest in formal, documented proposals. The plan's authors saw international law and public opinion not as constraints, but as obstacles to be manipulated. The Northwoods document is a primary source artifact of a cold-blooded strategic mindset. It reveals a willingness to sacrifice innocent lives for what was perceived as a greater geopolitical good. The plan to use college students as unwitting pawns is particularly chilling to modern sensibilities. It reflects a different era's calculus of risk and acceptable losses in the context of the Cold War. The psychological impact on the American public from such a deception would have been immense. Trust in the government, once broken so profoundly, might never have been repaired. The name Northwoods itself has become synonymous with the concept of government-sponsored false flag operations. The story serves as a powerful argument for transparency and accountability in government. Without the eventual declassification, this crucial piece of history would have been lost forever. It is a stark example of why historical archives and Freedom of Information Acts are so vital. The plan was a betrayal of the trust placed in the nation's highest military officers. They were tasked with protecting the nation, not fabricating threats against it. The civilian leadership's rejection was a crucial check on this abuse of power. Operation Northwoods remains a sobering lesson from a tense and dangerous chapter of modern history. The document proposed to develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even in Washington. It suggested that the terror campaign could be pointed at Cuban refugees seeking haven in the United States. Once upon a man nights or boy days. The plan also included sinking a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated. Another element was to foster attempts on lives of Cuban refugees in the United States, even to the extent of wounding. The planners wanted to create a Remember the Maine incident by blowing up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay. They would then publish casualty lists in U.S. newspapers to cause a helpful wave of national indignation. In Bangladesh, KCLC. The documents suggested that we could develop a Cuban-based, Castro-supported commando operation against a neighboring Caribbean nation. This neighboring nation could be Jamaica or Trinidad and Tobago, both members of the British Commonwealth. The United States would then intervene in support of the government of the selected nation. The plan's authors believed this would frame the U.S. as a protector of hemispheric stability. The sheer scope of the deception outlined in Operation Northwoods is its most enduring and shocking feature. It was a comprehensive, multifaceted conspiracy proposed by the nation's own military leaders. The rejection of the plan was a silent but profound victory for American democracy. It ensured that a war would not be started under false pretenses created by the government itself. The memory of Northwoods serves as a permanent warning against the abuse of power. It is a testament to the idea that even the most powerful must be held accountable to the law and to morality. The story of the rejected plan is as important as the story of the plan itself. It shows a system of checks and balances working, albeit in secret and under extreme pressure. Ultimately, Operation Northwoods is a chilling glimpse into a dark possibility that was thankfully never realized.